When someone says, I need space, it rarely sounds neutral. It sounds like distance, like rejection, like the beginning of an ending you didn't agree to. And the worst part? It's just two simple words, space. But inside those 5 letters is an entire emotional earthquake. Tonight, we're not going to talk about cliches. We're not going to say, give them space and everything will be fine. We're going to talk about what that sentence really means psychologically, philosophically, emotionally. Because when someone says, I need space, what they are often saying is far more complicated than they can explain. Close your eyes for a second. Imagine standing too close to a fire. At first, it feels warm, comforting, safe. But if you don't step back eventually, that same warmth begins to burn. Most relationships don't end because of hate. They suffocate because of intensity without oxygen. Space is not always escape. Sometimes it's survival. When someone says they need space, your nervous system hears you're losing them. Your body reacts before your mind does. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts spiral. You replay conversations looking for mistakes. You begin negotiating in your head. Was I too much? Did I text too often? Should I apologize for something I don't even understand? But here's something uncomfortable. Sometimes space has nothing to do with you, and that is harder to accept than blame. Because if it's your fault, you can fix it. If it's not your fault, you have no control. And human beings are addicted to control. Let's go deeper. There are different kinds of space. There is physical space, not seeing each other. There is emotional space, not sharing everything. And there is existential space, when someone is trying to rediscover who they are outside of US. That last one scares people the most. Because when someone begins rediscovering themselves, you risk becoming optional. But here's the paradox. A relationship where someone is not allowed to be an individual is not intimacy. It's fusion. And fusion feels romantic in movies. But in reality, it erodes identity. If two people completely lose themselves in each other, eventually one of them wakes up gasping for air. And that gasp sounds like, I need space. Think about this. When a person says they need space, they are admitting something vulnerable. They are saying, I don't feel balanced. I don't feel regulated. I don't know who I am inside this dynamic right now. That's not a villain speech. That's confusion. But we interpret it as abandonment. Why? Because most of us were never taught how to experience distance without panic. We were taught that closeness equals love, constant communication equals commitment, immediate reassurance equals safety. But healthy attachment is not constant proximity. It's voluntary return. Space tests something very uncomfortable. Do we love each other? Or do we rely on each other to regulate our fears? There's a difference. Love says, I want you. Fear says, I need you so I don't fall apart. And when someone asks for space, fear screams louder than love. Let's be honest. Sometimes I need space is soft language for I'm emotionally exhausted. And an emotional exhaustion doesn't always come from fighting. It can come from pressure, from expectations, from feeling responsible for someone else's happiness. If your partner feels like your entire emotional stability depends on them, they may begin to feel trapped. Not because they don't care, but because they feel they can't breathe. Breathing is essential for connection. No oxygen, no flame. But here's the part nobody likes hearing. Sometimes space is a slow goodbye. Not always, but sometimes. And the reason it hurts so much is because it's ambiguous. It's not a clean break. It's not a dramatic ending. It's uncertainty. And uncertainty is more psychologically painful than rejection. Rejection gives you clarity. Space gives you suspense. And suspense creates anxiety. So what do you do when someone says they need space? The instinct is to chase, to send one more message, to clarify, to fix, to convince. But chasing collapses the very thing they asked for. It turns space into tension. Instead of giving space freely, you give it resentfully. And resentment is loud, even in silence. Here's a difficult truth. If someone needs space from you, forcing closeness will not create love. It will create resistance. Connection cannot be negotiated under pressure. Let's look at this philosophically. In nature, everything requires distance. Planets orbit because of space. Music exists because of pauses. Breathing works because of inhaling and exhaling. Imagine inhaling without ever exhaling. You'd suffocate. Yet, in relationships, we try to inhale forever. We want constant closeness, constant reassurance, constant emotional availability. But rhythm requires space. And sometimes, space is not the opposite of intimacy. It is what allows intimacy to survive. Now let's talk about you. Because when someone says they need space, your real battle isn't with them. It's with your interpretation. Do you hear, "I don't love you"? Or do you hear, "I need to stabilize myself"? Your interpretation will determine your reaction. And your reaction will determine whether the relationship has oxygen or smoke. But let's not romanticize everything. If someone repeatedly asks for space, without clarity, without communication, without return, that's not space. That's avoidance. Healthy space has boundaries and timelines. Avoidance has vagueness and disappearance. If someone says, "I need space for a few days to think," that's different from, "I don't know when I'll be back." One is reflection. The other is emotional drifting. You deserve clarity. Space should not feel like punishment. And here's something empowering. When someone asks for space, you also get space. Space to evaluate. Space to notice your own patterns. Space to ask yourself, why does this terrify me so much? Is it this person? Or is it the fear of being alone? Sometimes we cling not because the relationship is perfect, but because the silence without it feels unbearable. Silence forces you to meet yourself, and many people would rather fight for someone than sit alone with their own thoughts. But space is a mirror. When the noise of constant communication fades, you start seeing your emotional habits clearly. Do you overgive? Do you overthink? Do you seek validation through constant reassurance? Space reveals, and revelation is uncomfortable. Let's flip the perspective. Have you ever needed space? Remember that feeling. Overstimulated, emotionally flooded, needing a pause to think clearly. Did it mean you stopped caring? Probably not. It meant you needed regulation. So why is it so hard to grant others the same humanity? Because when you're on the receiving end, your ego feels threatened. Ego says, if they truly loved me, they wouldn't need distance. But mature love understands something deeper. Two whole individuals choosing each other is stronger than two incomplete individuals clinging to each other. If someone returns after space with clarity, with intention, with renewed energy, that space strengthened the bond. If they don't return, then the space revealed a truth that would have surfaced eventually anyway. Space doesn't destroy healthy relationships. It exposes fragile ones. And exposure is painful, but honest. So, what should you actually do? First, regulate yourself. Do not respond from panic. Do not write long emotional essays. Do not demand reassurance in the same breath they ask for distance. Second, ask for clarity calmly. How much space do you need? What does space look like for you? Not as interrogation, as understanding. Third, use the space. Improve your routines. Strengthen your friendships. Reinvest in your goals. Not to make them jealous, but to remember you existed before this relationship. Because the most dangerous thing you can do is build your entire identity around someone else. When they step back, you collapse. That collapse is not love. It's dependency. And dependency always feels like emergency. Healthy love does not feel like emergency. It feels like choice. Here's the quiet power move no one talks about. Respecting someone's request for space without collapsing is deeply attractive. It signals confidence, security, emotional maturity. It says, I care about you, but I also care about myself. As one, and self-respect changes the energy of everything. If they come back, they return to someone grounded. If they don't, you didn't lose yourself in the process. That's the real victory. But let's go even deeper. Sometimes when someone asks for space, what they're truly testing, consciously or unconsciously, is whether the relationship can survive autonomy. Can you both exist separately without threatening the bond? Because real intimacy is not two people fused together. It is two independent worlds, choosing to intersect every day. Space is where individuality breathes. Without individuality, love turns into obligation, and obligation eventually turns into resentment. You cannot beg someone into closeness. You cannot negotiate someone into certainty. You can only create conditions where closeness feels safe to return to, and safety is built on freedom, not pressure. So the next time someone says, I need space, pause before reacting. Ask yourself, is this an ending? Or is this a reset? Is this avoidance? Or is this self-regulation? And most importantly, who am I without constant reassurance from this person? Because that question is the real work. If you can sit with space without turning it into catastrophe, you become powerful. You become someone who loves without gripping, who cares without controlling, who allows without losing themselves. And that kind of presence is rare. Remember this. If someone truly wants to be with you, space will not erase that. If someone is unsure, pressure will not fix that. Let space reveal. Let silence speak. Let absence clarify. And while they figure themselves out, you figure yourself out too. Because the most important space is not the distance between you and them. It's the distance between who you are when you're afraid of losing someone and who you are when you know you'll be okay. Either way, that is emotional freedom. And emotional freedom is the foundation of every love that actually lasts.